Welcome to Local Authors Book Group. This is going to be fun. We have a wonderful author with us today who's returned recently to the Spokane area, the Northwest. She, for a while, and you'll know why in a minute, was up in Alaska. So she's going to tell us all about that. Her book is about the March 27th, 1964 earthquake that just about wiped all of Alaska off the, well, not quite, but anyway, it was pretty devastating. And the town of Valdez was particularly hit. I think it was what, Tabitha, at the epicenter, wasn't it?
It was very close, about
Yeah.
45 miles.
Okay. So she's going to share with us what happened before and just after and what it ended up resulting in. People did, life went on, and she's going to tell us how and why. So, Tabitha, I will let you take over. And oh, I should mention first, she also writes for the North, what is it called?
Columbia
Yeah, I
Monthly.
always wanted to call it the Northwest. North Columbia. What else?
I've been writing for Out There Outdoors.
Okay. But the North Columbia, there's another word to it.
Oh, monthly.
Monthly, that's right. I do this on purpose so people will go, what? And they'll pay attention. So look her up because I think you'll like her writing. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Tabitha Gregory, who's going to wow us.
All right. Okay. Can everybody hear me? I guess raise your hand if you can't, since you're all muted. Okay, so yeah, thanks. This is just really fun opportunity. So I'll introduce myself and then I've got some discussion points and some topics and some little sections I can read, and I've got some slides to show. Since this is officially a book club, the typical book club format is very casual, discussion questions and discussion around those questions and stuff. So Linda's kind of told me that that's not always the format for these particular meetings. So I have some things that I can more present, but I'm totally happy to be sidetracked. I really don't mind at all today if people pop up and share. I think it's Chris, right? Chris, who mentioned that she was born in Alaska and that her parents have memories and recollections of the earthquake. So I totally am fine with people just jumping in and sharing experiences or observations. And I think it was Mr. Logan who mentioned he, studied geology and, has some thoughts on, and some experience, hands-on experience and expertise in seismology and that sort of thing. So yeah, so just, and my sisters are here today too. So, I told them they can't have coke, but if they have, ideas or things that they think are interesting about the book or about the history, we can totally make it more discussion and sharing and less presentation as the group wants. So there we go. And if I start coughing, sorry, I'm just at the tail end of the crud that everybody has been getting. So that will be a good opportunity to share your stories as well. I'll just mute myself. So yeah, I can talk just a bit. Let's see, we've got an hour, right? Is still 3? Is that kind of our time ish? Okay. That works for me. So yeah, I can start with just a little bit about myself. And then we can talk about the book publication a little bit. I can give you just a little summary about the book. I do have a couple of sections to read, and then I thought I'd talk to you about what got me interested in the topic and some of the bigger sort of global lessons I learned from my research and what I think the story of Valdez can kind of bring to the global population as we're looking at things like climate change and, natural disaster recovery and that kind of stuff. So I'm Tabitha. I was actually born and raised in Alaska. I was born in Ketchikan. my mom and dad are from Texas and Oklahoma, actually, we're from. They both passed. And they moved to Alaska just after the earthquake and before the oil uh, boom. And my sisters were born out of state, but we all grew up in Alaska, primarily Ketchikan. And then I went to school at WSU for a couple years, and then went to University of Alaska and got my bachelor's degree in natural resources management. And I worked for some land managing agencies, Forest Service, Park Service for a couple years, off and on, mostly seasonal. And then worked for an advocacy group in Anchorage, environmental advocacy group there for a little bit. And then moved to Valdez in 1996. And I lived there for 22 years or so, 21 years. And then just recently moved down here to Spokane back in 2018. So I guess not that recently, 5 years almost. And then I've been kind of participating off and on with the Inland Northwest Writers Guild. I really love going to the meetings. Thank you, Linda. The meetings have just been great. The resources have been fabulous. And actually, I've been writing and researching the book prior to moving here. But once I started going to the meetings, the resources, the people I met there, really helped sort of focus some of my story and my writing. And then also, you know, I ended up learning about like Grey Dog Press, and who ended up printing the book. And I met my editor, Barbara Mulvey Little, at one of the meetings, and she was fantastic. She really helped me fine tune the structure of the book and do some just technical editing and stuff. So yeah, that I actually have gotten lots out of participating in the group and networking through you guys. I spent a little bit of time with one of the critique groups, but not so much. Just it's just a lot of time. I work full time. I'm a firm administrator at a law office downtown, so I work, you know, regular hours and stuff. So it's a little hard to fit in all the meetings and the critique groups. Critique group I was participating in was really good, but they were meeting kind of longer, like pretty regularly, like a weekly almost, or every couple of weeks, and they were kind of long. So it was just a little much for me. I haven't gotten back to that, but anyways, that's that. So then I guess to my book. Any discussion questions yet? What? Linda, I can't hear you. I can't hear Linda.
Linda, you're muted.
There we go.
Heck, I'm not used to being muted. People can't shut me up. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, you mentioned you were going to share what inspired you to write about this topic, and so I was curious about that.
Yeah. So I lived in Valdez, like I mentioned, for 21 years, and a good part of that, about half of that time, I was working for the Valdez Museum. So the museum is a local history museum. They do some art, but mostly it's a little typical local history museum. I shouldn't say typical. It's actually a pretty great, well-funded museum because it is in Valdez, where there's a pretty affluent, good economy. There's an oil industry, and so donations and the city government and stuff is, you know, funds the museum. So it's actually a really nice museum. Anyways, while I worked there, I got acquainted with a lot of old towners, what they call themselves, people who lived in the old town, were born or raised there, or both. who were adults there, and then who some of whom actually went through the move to the new town. And as it turns out, and one of the strange things that I just noticed over the years that I worked at the museum is that those old towners, they didn't have strong recollections about the relocation. They could tell you exactly their memories of the earthquake. You know, what the streets looked like when they were rolling, the splitting streets, the spewing water, what they were doing. So and so was sitting in my chair. I mean, they were very, very clear on what happened at the earthquake, but no one could really tell me anything or talked. There was no lore, no family lore, no community lore about the town moving entirely from the old town site to where it is today. And that just struck me as so strange because, you know, on one hand, people were just kind of offhanded about it, like the town moved. The town moved. And that's kind of all they could really say about the experience. And so that just kind of stuck with me. And while I worked at the museum, I was doing a number of other exhibits. We were doing all kinds of things. We actually redid the earthquake exhibit. But we never really took the time to dig into the relocation story. So then after leaving the museum, I just started becoming more and more interested in kind of that period and why the town does look the way it does. So Valdez, I'll show you some slides here in a minute, but you'll see the town doesn't have a very like historic look to it. It doesn't look Alaskan. It looks kind of blah, you know, the buildings are kind of square. They're just all laid out on these big streets. It's just a strange place if you don't know the history of the relocation. It just is disconcerting because every other town you go to in Alaska has an old town. So every other community, you know, you go to kind of has this gold rush center, whether it's Anchorage or Ketchikan, or there's these old canneries, or, you know, there's these boardwalks, or there's these old churches, and, you know, these historic homes up on the hill, you know, these narrow streets. And in Valdez, you just don't get that. And although everybody in town complained bitterly about, you know, this idea of like the loss of the old town, no one could explain or verbalize like why did we leave the old town and why does the new town look the way it does. So I became very interested in exploring that so that possibly you know, people who live there today or people who visit today could get a little bit more of an insight into what's behind the look of the new town. So that's kind of what kicked me off on the topic. So maybe I'll show just a few. Oh, did you want to say something?
Well, maybe you're already going to talk about it, but why did the town move? Is it on the fault line or some other reason?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, let me show some slides because I have some really good slides that'll explain that. I'm gonna mute for just a second and cough so I'm not coughing in everybody's ear.
They're not bothering us.
Give me a minute. Give me a second. Yeah, I'm back. Okay, I'm gonna show just a few slides. and I'm not gonna like do a lot of time on any one slide, but I thought it might help, especially if you don't have a connection to Alaska, to see the community and kind of this area where the book is taking place. So I'm going to, do I share my screen first? I do, don't I? Okay. Oh, and then click share. And then now participants can see my screen, and I play it from the start. Okay, can you guys see this slide?
Mhm.
Okay, but not all the notes, just the slide, right?
Right.
Okay, so here's Valdez. It's just a drop dead beautiful place. It's just gorgeous. It's right at the head of the fjord. It's in Prince William Sound. This picture was taken just before I moved in 2018. So this is just kind of up on a hill above the ocean, looking back towards the mountains.
I was going to ask a stupid question. Obviously, it's the new town because it couldn't be the old one. It's been years since, what is it, 50, 60 years almost?
Yeah, but no, people still refer to themselves as old towners and new towners,
Oh,
and the old town and the new town, even though there is no old town left. Okay, so here's some beautiful pictures of Valdez today. Kind of this is what the community is known for. Beautiful scenery, great skiing in the backcountry, then of course the pipeline terminal. And then here's just a collage of some characters from the book. This kind of gives you a sense of the period of time that the book takes place in. So my book is focused on the period of the relocation, and start being the earthquake, 1964, March 27, 1964, and then running through 1968 or into 1968 when the relocation was complete. So this gal here on the right is Ethel Roden. She's one of my favorite characters in the book. I interviewed her daughter, and so a number of her daughter's stories about Ethel appear throughout the book and kind of interwoven with the history. This is another one of my main characters. This is Helen Long. She's just a great and interesting character. She was a veteran, a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. She was one of the first women to serve in active duty in the military. She served in World War II and domestically in the Coast Guard. And then she became the publisher. She moved to Valdez and then became the publisher of the local newspaper and did a lot of writing. She left letters behind, lots of material from her, and then some great photo archives as well. She's a lot of fun. Whoops. Oh, and here's a couple other my characters. This is Paul Finfer. He's the man who, the architect, landscape designer, who designed the new town. So he brought he's the man behind the layout and the visual aesthetic of the community. And I'll just show you, he's kind of an inspiration. And this is my dad, who was a contemporary. He was also an architect, and he studied much of the same material and would have learned, a lot of the same things from the same experts and authorities that Paul Finfer did. And I think they would have enjoyed and shared the same aesthetic. So this was kind of an inspiration to me as I kind of made my way through the story. These are just some of the photo archives and archival materials that I was able to access at the Valdez Museum. These are some of the hand drawings of the town as it eventually was laid out by Paul Finfer, the architect. And then to your point, Chris, about why did they move the town? So I think our geologist, Mr. Logan, might also appreciate this photograph. This is an aerial of the old town. So can you see my arrow when I'm moving it across the screen?
Yep.
Boop, boop, boop. Okay,
Teeny
this is the
tiny little thing.
little thing. Okay, so you can see this, what I'm pointing to, this is the ocean, this is the Port Valdez. And then this little pie here is the old town. This is this little pod, this little like only dry patch in this delta. This is the Valdez Glacier Stream. So this is a massive braided river. And Valdez was a gold rush camp originally back in the early 1900s. And, you know, just like many gold rush camps just became permanent over the years. And the community built dikes around it to ward off and try to hold back the river. So not only was there flooding periodically from the river, but the delta is so it's a glacier stream, so it's bringing sediments down. So this entire delta is truly sand. So Valdez was a town built on sand. And then here's another good picture. This is a different view, more contemporary. You can see this picture on the left. This is the glacier in the very back. And you can see how the river just splits and circles the town. And then I'm going to show you a picture. And this is the new town on the right, which is just a better setup altogether. It just has this one kind of nicely contained river creek. And then this is what happened during the earthquake. The entire face of the delta was it was shaken and then inundated with water, and it just left off, and it took these docks and everybody with it in just a matter of seconds. So the docks were completely gone. 30 people died. They were down waiting for a cargo ship to unload, and it was devastating. And then the rest of the town, of course, being built on sand, just was heavily damaged. It was devastated. Town roads cracked open, you know, buildings fell. It was a horrible event. And so then the government, of course, you know, the ones who would inevitably foot the bill for any kind of massive reconstruction, which they did all across the coastal region of Alaska after the earthquake. I mean, they simply weren't going to rebuild on sand. So they selected a new site and moved the town. So this is a new town, and Newtown is surrounded by bedrock, these little bedrock islands. It's on a different kind of substrate altogether, not as susceptible to you know, physical damage from shaking or from inundation in the case of a earthquake. Okay, so I just wanted to show you in this picture the difference, just one, you know, visual difference between the old and the new. So this is the old town on the right, you know, sort of quaint 1950s. I mean, from a photograph perspective, and certainly for people who left the old town, this is the kind of like Mayberry that they remember. Of course, there's, you know, a lot of things that didn't work well in the old town. It was hard. Snow removal was hard. You know, buildings were old and dilapidated, and heating furnaces were old fashioned, and just it wasn't a modern town, but it had a lot of memories there, and it was people were and continue to be very nostalgic about the old town. And then this is kind of typical Newtown Valdez, just modern, you know, it was all built in 1964, 19 to 1968. So that is the look of the town. These big wide streets, very, very good for snow removal, very good for traffic, very practical. All the buildings, you know, very, very sturdy. Everything works well, very modern, but doesn't have a whole lot, or didn't for many years have a lot of visual character that, you know, people remembered from the old town. Just kind of to that point, and everybody just again jump in if you have questions or thoughts on any of this. I just like to share a few of the buildings that are pretty well known that were also built in that period of time, so you get kind of a feeling for what Valdez looks like. Well, let's say the design aesthetic that the architects and the engineers were bringing to the project, right? This is what people were building in the Northwest at that time. So this is actually on the left a building my dad designed. It was built in 1973. This is the Shadle water reservoir up north here in Spokane, very 60s, 1965, right during the time of our Valdez reconstruction. And then this is a, beautiful building up on the University of Alaska campus, built in 1970. Here's the lovely Space Needle. So this was, 1962. Again, this was the aesthetic of the time. And so that is what Newtown looked like for many years. It has kind of a different vibe to it now, just because we're 60 years later. So there's, been a little bit more beautification and that kind of stuff. Also lending to kind of the design character of the town is just the whole, the advent of the suburbia and the ranchers. These were just classic, very affordable homes in the 1960s. The trailer had just come on the market. The double wide came on the market like in 1968. And so people in Valdez, really went with the mobile homes. They were affordable, they were quick. You could just plug them in and, they would work. So here's some of the buildings as they look today that were built in the new town originally. A lot of metal. These are, I think, some of the more aesthetically pleasing buildings built in Newtown, after the relocation. I think they really focused on this rock work, and I just think these are very beautiful and appealing. But again, people in Valdez have a hard time appreciating these unless they kind of really understand the history behind the move.
They didn't actually try to move any of the old buildings, I take it.
Oh, yeah.
You did?
They did. They did. They ended up moving 52 buildings, and this is one of them here. So nice timing. And it was as if we practiced that segue. So yeah, there were some people who preferred or chose to, or ended up their only option was to move a house from the old town to the new town and put it on a foundation there. So one of the perennial issues during the relocation was how were people going to fund their moves to the new town. So just like now, money to rebuild or repair your structures is not free money. It's loans, it's government loans, usually low interest. Usually there's fewer barriers to access the loans, but nonetheless, it's not free money. It has to be paid back, and you have to qualify. And so in Valdez, some families did not qualify or did not want to get a loan. And so in those cases, in some of those cases, people chose to try to move their house instead. And so I've got some interesting photos in the book of the buildings being moved. There's some very interesting stories about that. One of the things that I had heard before I started researching this book, one of the little pieces of lore that did kind of surface early on, is there was kind of this story about the government wasn't going to allow a family to move their house to the new town, and so this family in the dark of night, like took their house off the foundation, put it on the back of a truck and moved it, unbeknownst to the government officials into the new town. And it's like, wow, that's really cool. But then after I started thinking about those stories for a while, it's like, wait, you can't just load a house on the back of a truck in the dark of night and somehow no one noticed that it's moving down this road and then somehow get it, like attached to its foundation. I mean, that's a long process. And as I came to find out, of course, it is a long process and you had to meet government codes. And anyways, it's just very interesting, the kinds of these little bits and pieces of like urban legend, if you will, that seem to survive or develop about the relocation. I mean, there wasn't much that to develop, but there was a little bit.
I was thinking earlier about the idea of how you did your research, and I noticed that Sari is thinking the same way. She wrote in the chat, as fellow writers, people might be interested in how you gleaned a story out of city council meeting records.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Many of the writers, if they want to do, whether they're writing fiction or nonfiction, they're going to want to do research. And so it's always helpful to know what people have used and how they've gone about it with their books.
Yeah. So I think that's great. Thank you, Sari. So I thought at the beginning of my project, I was like, is this going to be an article? Is this going to be a book? Is it going to be a series of articles? Just a few little fun facts that I write for, the Valdez Museum about the relocation. Because I just wasn't sure how much material I would find. And as it turns out, there was so much material. The whole story is sitting right there in the city council chambers and at City Hall and at the Valdez Museum. It's just like in extreme detail between the newspapers, which came out weekly. So this Helen Long, she was the editor and she did a weekly publication all through the relocation period. So all 4 years. And she would write like every week a column on the houses that moved, on the, a status of the hospital construction, the stat where we were with, the dock building. And she gave lots of color, who was mad at who was in and out of town, like who was struggling, who was doing, who was ahead of the curve, all that kind of thing. And then on the city council side, the city council minutes are just like, I've never seen minutes so detailed. They're just almost transcripts of meetings, and they were meeting sometimes daily, at least weekly during the whole reconstruction period. And so, it is the record of the building of a town. So it's an incredibly good resource for anyone who's thinking about building a new town. And as it turns out, there are a number of communities thinking about building new towns right now because they're sitting on coastal areas with threats of rising high tides, or along riverine areas where, flooding is starting to become more dominant. So as it turns out, the resources that Valdez has are readily available and just really good resources for
it brings up
for anybody.
Point, because of so many, like you say, so many of the coastal regions now with the waters rising around, they're going to be facing the same issues. And,
yeah.
Not only how to do it, where to even find the location where they're going to plunk themselves down, because all those questions are very important. I'm interested in whether or not I don't know how to put this. Are there any agencies that are studying the Valdez experience? I'm thinking of things like FEMA and any of the planning agencies. Is anybody studying what went on there so that they can maybe have some good ideas, or you're not aware?
Not exactly, I think, but I'm hoping that my book is a resource and kind of a, takes all of that raw material and puts it into one place. so people can use it. I'm giving, well, last year I gave a technical presentation at the Alaska Planners Association conference. It's community planners, planners from agencies like you're speaking of. So I did a presentation there about sort of lessons learned from the Valdez experience. And then I'm going to do actually another technical presentation later this month at the Alaska Tribal Health Consortium's Environmental Management Conference, because the Native communities in Alaska are they're they're like right on the coast.
So many up there.
Yeah. So I do think the Valdez story is really interesting. It's I think so far what I've been talking about is kind of the technical a little bit, right? Like the move, the town moves and the decision to move and that kind of thing. As it turns out, I was also able to access some oral histories, and once I really started probing people about their recollections, it was still pretty vague and fuzzy, but I did get some interesting personal stories, and it's kind of enlightening. It's a little bit heartbreaking, a little bit inspirational, what the individual people and the families kind of grappled with and coped with over 4 years, where they were, trying to live in this old town that was like a disaster zone. There was buildings that were boarded up. There were buildings that were being burned and razed.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Right.
And at the same time, they were trying to plan their future and, piece together funding to move their families. And many of them, about a third of the population that was in Valdez, left. Many families left town and just threw in the towel. We're like, we can't make this happen for whatever reason. And, went elsewhere. And then there were other people who stuck around and they moved businesses, they moved their homes, they moved their families. And, there's little kids who remember that time and just how like disconcerting and discombobulating it was. They were being bussed from the old to the new. The little kids were the first ones to go to school, or they were going to school in the new town before people even lived there. So I mean, that's just like this bizarre kind of dystopian experience of this new town with no houses, but there's this metal-sided school sitting in the middle of this denuded area where a town was going to go. And so anyways, there's a lot of really interesting personal stuff that I tried to weave into the history, because I know an administrative history such as this can sometimes be pretty dry, but there's some really great individuals.
Do you have any figures about comparing the populations between the old town and the new town? I mean, how many people were living there before, and then how many are?
Yeah, there was about 500 people who was about a population about 550 or so. And then the population is a little fuzzy because, it's kind of like, the census just happens every 10 years, right? So 64 was the earthquake. So there's 550 people, we think, living in Valdez at that time. And then the next population census was 1970, and that was a couple years after the oil boom. And so, it's very difficult to piece that together exactly. But just judging by, the telephone book and, when I knew a lot of the names, and a lot of them were leaving and just following the social columns in the newspaper, you could just see, a lot of people leaving and pulling up their roots. I did want to do a couple of little quotes so you can get a sense of the book a little bit. So I did combine a straight historical narrative, just like this is what happened, with kind of a chronology So hopefully it's not a dry chronology. I've had good comments about it, the writing of that style. And then I've also combined it with some personal quotations throughout the book, so you really get a first person view. And then I did something that is a little different. If you're familiar with national parks, they sometimes, and museums, they sometimes do this living history thing where an individual person, an interpreter, will read and take on the persona of a historical character, and they kind of try to give life to history that way. And so I tried that with writing, and I think it was effective. People have told me it was effective, and I've tried to identify those sections so they don't come off as being like a direct quote, but that they're kind of my, from reading all these different sources, this is my interpretation of what so and so might say or have experienced in a particular situation. So I thought I'd read you one little section like that, and then a couple of quick direct quotes, just so you can get a little bit more of a sense of the style of the book. Okay, so there was a guy who served as mayor. He happened to be mayor at the time of the earthquake, and his name was Mayor Bruce Woodford. So this is kind of one of those living history sections. So I learned a lot about him because he was very present throughout the city council minutes. So here's what I think he would have experienced. So this is September of 1964, so a few months after the earthquake, and this is from his perspective. The people of Valdez are growing tired of waiting. Folks here are concerned about only one thing: how much money are they going to get from the government? We need that money to rebuild over in the new town. People are saying that they believe the government people are dragging their feet. How hard can it be after all? Months ago, the appraisers, Trott and Blinkhorn, completed their work. That should have been the hard part. As for me, I understand this is a big project, and I meant what I said to Mr. Inc. during the public meeting tonight, that we owe him a deep debt of gratitude for his assistance. But not everyone feels that way. Just look around and you'll understand why gratitude may be the last thing on their minds. Our town is still in a serious state of disrepair. Sewer and water pipes lay exposed in open pits. There's little we can do about our town before winter sets in. Everyone is anxious. Well, that's kind of a living history.
Sounds like you left out swear words.
People in that period didn't say swear words, right? Oh, wait, no, I did hear my dad curse now and then. And then here's a direct quote from an oral history that was recorded in the 1980s, I believe. So this is Shirley Scott. She was a Valdez resident and a hospital employee. And she said, this is a short one, just a couple of sentences. She said of her recollections of that time, the people were pretty much involved in putting their lives back together. So there wasn't as much visiting and coffee drinking and such as there was before the earthquake. And then Gloria, her contemporary, another Valdez resident, said, same oral history project. The funniest thing about it was the people that were here during the quake were not aware of how stressed they were. They knew some of them were short-tempered and some of them were bothered about various things. They weren't aware of the fact that they were severely stressed. So I tried to weave in some of those.
Those are great comments that you have them making, because they bring out the things, even no matter what the catastrophe is and all the things going on. That happens. People don't even know they're stressed out.
Yeah.
Just are.
Yeah. And then I'll just share with you one more. This is a quote from the social column in 1966. So about halfway through the project. This is about the moving buildings that we were talking about earlier. So the writer of the social column, who I believe to be Helen Long, says. Lots of buildings moving this week. A weird sight to see an uprooted home serenely proceeding down a street unattached to its lot. Among those on the move were the former post office, the dock company's 2-story building, Bob Kelsey's home, Jim Derringer's house down by his gas station, and Vera Harshman's home.
Wow.
It's very specific.
You're right. Those are great things because they really do bring it home. You know, they bring it. We're looking at the people themselves and their lives and what they experience. So it's a very good decision you made to put that in there.
Yeah.
Well, if everybody wants to unmute, you know, as many of you as want to, I'd say it's okay to let the dogs out, and we'll just kind of snap at her heels and no, let's not do that. Let's very politely make comments and ask questions. And I know Chris has been kind of waiting to say something again.
I just wanted to say that a town is actually moving in our own state right now. And that's over on the Quinault Indian Reservation, the town of Queets. And the reason that it's moving is that it too is very close to the ocean. And so there's a threat of tsunami. And so I looked it up, and there's about 600 people that live in the town. And so the tribe is paying for part of that. And you had asked about agencies, Linda. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is partly paying for it. And also the U.S. Housing and Urban Development has a lot of grants to help towns move. But it's just one town, and it sounds like there are others that are also interested in moving. And I suspect that with the way our climate is going, there's going to be a few more.
Makes me want to
Yeah.
cry.
I know.
Oh,
And I would say that the Valdez story is a great model. And along with that there's many lessons to be learned about what could be done better. And one of the things that clearly could have been done better, no judgment on the people of the time, because it was, I mean, they were moving after a freaking 9.2 earthquake. It was, yeah. Anyways, the maintenance or some thought into the old town and how to preserve parts of the old town, the heritage, the story, the oral history, and how to preserve the story of the move so that the people who move feel like they were not the destroyers of history, but instead that they're continuing the history of the community, that they're in some sense, you know, heroes, the people who move, the people who make that hard decision. Because future generations will look back and be like, why did you leave? Why did you leave the old? And that's what we found in the Valdez. And I think, you know, the people who made that move are to be admired. And, you know, it was hard. And they did a lot in a short period of time. So I think that's one of the big takeaways from the Valdez experience is just how, you know, communities today might think a little bit more strategically and apply more resources or something to that idea of, okay, how do we kind of like create our narrative or keep our history, just that whole picture.
well, Tabitha, you
Were you there when,
Kathy, go ahead.
were you there when there was oil on the beaches in '88, or you?
So I moved to Valdez in 1996 after
Oh,
the
so
oil spill.
I wondered what, I mean, it seems like a huge thing that you would have been in my lifetime. It was a huge deal.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. Yeah.
We can keep, yeah, go ahead, Jay. Jay?
You're okay. You're breaking up there for a while. One thing I want to know was that when you moved, if you think about it, when you community, it's just not a whole mass of people. Each person has their own little neighbor. This is my neighbor and that neighbor. And did they try to preserve that, or did some people say, I don't want to have this person as a neighbor again, or what? Was there any sort of things like that going on?
Yeah, I totally thought when I started it, that was a huge question I had. It's like, how the heck would you even go about figuring out where people are going to go? And so, yeah, the new town was totally different than the old town. And people were just like a deck of cards, just boop, scattered, just thrown up into the air, and they all came down in different places. But it was a little more organized than that as well. So there's like at least one, maybe two chapters totally devoted to the system that the city council adopted to help people decide and put bids on essentially, which lots they might want. So yeah, do you want a corner lot? Do you want a south facing lot? It's a chance to start over. And so some people really took that to heart and were like, oh, where do we want to be in the new town? Do we want to be close to the school? Do we want to be close to the commercial district when we move? There was preference rights systems where people who owned property, lived in Old Town, had the first right of selection, and there was an extensive process for two people wanted the same lot, how to go about differentiating, deciding who gets what. So yes, that was a huge process.
Go ahead, Chris.
So I would imagine a challenge in this case, and maybe even more so in other areas, is the land that's available to move to. Somebody must own it. In that case, I'm guessing it might have been federally owned land, or what was the situation?
Yeah, I mean, another one of my huge questions. The only thing that I could get before I really started delving into the written record was that there was an old pioneer family, old gold rush family, who owned the property where Newtown is now, and they generously donated, out of the goodness of their heart, the land for the new town. And that was kind of it. And it's like, so there has to be a bigger story there. And indeed there was. And it was complicated. But it was privately owned. It had been homesteaded. So I explained kind of that more in the book about what that means, and what that meant in this particular case. But the land was acquired under the homestead rules and law by these two pioneer families, and it was supposed to be the town of Valdez. It was supposed to be where they wanted Valdez to be. These families, they were kind of what do you call it, speculators, and yet the town continued to remain and grow up around this hazardous zone, where the gold rush camp had been. And so then, after the earthquake, indeed, it was kind of a gift, but it's complicated. And then there were legal battles about the titling, the transfer of the title, and the boundaries, and the tax benefits that were supposed to be gained by the families for donating the land. And it definitely was a complicating point. And actually, there's a number of chapters throughout the book on the progression of kind of these lawsuits and this eventual transfer of the title for the town.
I just thought I'd pop in here so we don't fade out eventually, but this is a self-published book, and because we're not able to get it anywhere other than from Tabitha, we well, there's another place, but I won't mention it. We we do have it at Auntie's available for you to purchase if you'd like. And one thing to remind you, just be sure to request your 15% book club discount if you do purchase at the store, which I hope you will. This book is full of pictures, is it not?
Yeah, I put a lot of photos in it, and some maps and diagrams and all kinds of fun stuff, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lovely book. I love your cover. I love your cover. It is beautiful. Makes me want to move there.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
No,
It
yeah,
is
I agree.
beautiful. More photos.
I like living in little houses. I'd want to live in one of the old town ones that have been moved.
I know,
Kind of
they're
know
cute.
that. Of course, I
They're
should be
cute.
my age, but I mean,
I like them.
I was alive when this thing hit.
I know. I have to say, I really love some of the cute little trailers now. After learning the history, the little trailers from the 1960s, I just think they're cute, and the little mid-century modern ranchers. And I actually lived in. I didn't know this until I started researching the book, but I lived in a fourplex that was one of the very first buildings built in the new town. And after I learned that, I was like, oh, I live in a fourplex. The original fourplex.
Tony says, such an interesting story. Can't wait to read it. Thank you for sharing. And
Yes, so it is 3. So yeah, I'm happy with us to wrap it.
wanted to know why you, I mean, because a lot of these people are writers, why you chose to self-publish. I mean, just, quick, doesn't have to go in depth. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty straightforward answer. I spent a few months sending out some query letters to agents and publishers and got no response. I'm like, wow, I just really want to see this book in print.
Yeah, sure.
So I just self-published.
Well, good for you. Good for you. Any other questions or comments folks have? Terry says to thank everybody. Well, thank
you,
Terry. I think Kathy, didn't you come in from Montana?
I did.
Yeah, she's
And
all the
I'm
way
laughing at somebody who wants to move to Alaska because it's really cold here, but it's sunny every day, so it's okay. But when it's cold and not sunny, like Alaska, I'm not sure you'd want to. That would cut into my psychological productivity. But I was in Valdez during the spill.
Oh, okay. Oh,
The
yeah.
government then, yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
that's
goodness.
how I paid for part of my undergraduate degree.
Right. That's a book in itself. There you go.
Well, it was a really, really big deal, but I didn't know anything about the earthquake until I heard about the book. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you came. Good to meet you.
Well, one good thing we know is Alaska's already had its big one. It doesn't get another one. So that's probably the place we're all going to want to move to, because someday we're sitting between the tsunami on the West Coast and Yellowstone Park. And hey, there's a lot could happen here.
True. All right, folks.
That's true.
Should we wrap it up?
Sure, whatever you like.
Great.
All right. So good to have you. Yes, Chris, thank you for your comments and your questions. And if you want to chat at all more about the book, just feel free to reach out.
Stop the recording.